Hey everybody, welcome. If you are unsure if your anxiety is going to get better or worse over time, or if you're unsure what kind of anxiety you really have, or if you are unsure what all of your options are to reduce your anxiety, then please stay tuned for this important session. So today what I'll be sharing with you guys are three main things that will add a lot of value to you. The first one is I'm going to be going over the two big types of anxiety, how to know which one you really have. One of them is really problematic, one of them is not so problematic. Okay, the second thing I'll be going over today is inside of those two big buckets of types of anxiety, there are also 5 unique variations. So we're going to be covering the 5 unique variations. That way you can figure out which one is exactly yours, and I'll show you how to identify that. Then the third main thing that we'll be covering today as well is I'll also be covering the only major 4 ways that are available to reduce your anxiety. So that way we can figure out which ones have you tried, which ones have you not tried, and you can figure out which one is really right for you, okay? And for those of you guys who are joining, if you have any questions you want answered during the live stream, just go ahead and add those in the comment section, and then I will address all of those at the end so I can make sure that I serve you guys individually, okay? So if you're brand new to our online community, welcome. My name is Ty Hicks, founder of mentalhealthcoaching.com and the SSS brain retraining method. We put out this free content for you guys every single week because we believe, my team and I really believe, that nobody should have to live with anxiety lifelong, and that anybody can learn how to overcome anxiety if you get the right skills, the right systems, the right tools in place. And so we want to make sure that we can provide for you those skills and tools, okay? So 3 main things we're going over today. Again, the first one is the 2 major giant types of anxiety. We're going to go through those. Next, the 5 unique variations inside of those 2 major types of anxiety so you can figure out which one you have. And then third, we're going to go through the 4 ways that you can reduce any type of anxiety so we can figure out which one is best for you. Okay, and then I've got a free gift for you guys here at the end that I think you'll enjoy as well. Okay, and again, if you have questions, go ahead and write them in. So first of all, the 2 major types of anxiety, what are they? So I like to call these the 2 big buckets of anxiety. So think of there being 2 buckets, and inside of each bucket, there's going to be several different variations of anxiety. So what I call these is, first of all, we have what we call lowercase a anxiety, and then we have what we call uppercase a anxiety. Okay, so lowercase a anxiety is what we would call normal anxiety. Okay, anybody is going to have anxious moments, fearful moments, stressful moments. The example I usually like to give is if you were crossing the street and a car almost hits you, you're supposed to feel anxious, you're supposed to feel afraid, you're supposed to feel scared. That's very normal, okay? And so there's nothing wrong with you in that particular situation. I have people who come to me all the time who are dealing with lowercase a anxiety, and they think it's uppercase a anxiety, right? They think that they've really got a big, large anxiety issue that they need to deal with. And very often, it's just that you have lowercase a anxiety. You're going through a naturally anxious or stressful period. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't tools and solutions that can even help you navigate that temporarily stressful period better. But it's just important to recognize whether you are going through a phase where the anxiety is very likely to peter out on its own, or if you're going through a type of anxiety that has a life of its own, where it's not going to go away on its own and we have to do some type of intervention to deal with it. So some signs that you have lowercase a anxiety would be the following. If you've been dealing with anxiety for less than 60 days, that is a decent chance, there's a decent, decent probability that you are dealing with just lowercase a anxiety. Another tall tale sign is if you've gone through a major life transition recently. So if you got a new job, if you were fired, if you had a breakup, if someone in your family just got sick, if you got some bad medical news, okay, if you're going through what we call a spin, okay, any type of small spin, some type of situation where you were headed down a particular path and then all of a sudden you're spinning out of control in some way or another, and you're dealing with an uncertain situation, those are the most common situations that will provoke anxiety. And you might just be going through lowercase a temporary anxiety. Okay, another good sign that it's lowercase a temporary anxiety is if the severity is not very high. If it's maybe below a 5 out of 10, and it's been only for a couple weeks, then there's a decent chance that it might just go away on its own. Okay, some signs that you have uppercase A anxiety. Okay, this simply means that your nervous system now has conditioned itself to go into that same pattern on a repetitive basis. So it would be uppercase A anxiety if the fear or anxiety that you have, if whatever it is that you're afraid of seems to you in some part irrational. So for example, if you keep thinking that you're having heart attacks, meanwhile your doctors have told you that your heart is fine, that is clear that you have an anxiety issue that we need to deal with. Okay, if you keep believing that something horrible is going to take place when you go to the grocery store, even though you live in a fairly safe neighborhood and all those types of things, then that would be an uppercase A anxiety. If you keep believing that your boss or your coworkers dislike you or that you're going to get fired, even though they keep telling you or putting in writing that you're doing a good job, that would be uppercase A anxiety. So if other people around you are having a tough time getting on board with what you are afraid of, if you even in and of yourself think that what you are afraid of seems kind of silly or irrational, or also if the anxiety is popping up in a repetitive capacity, okay, it's not just a one-time deal, such as, like if your boss says, hey, we need to talk, and that's the very first time that your boss has ever said that to you, it would be normal for you to feel a little bit anxious about that type of situation. But if you are feeling anxious every single time your boss wants to talk to you, even though every time your boss wants to talk to you, it's actually just fine, then that's an indicator that you have an anxiety pattern, that your nervous system has adopted that anxiety pattern. It has now become conditioned. It's become repetitive. It's become automatic. And that we are going to need to deal with that using some direct intervention and some tools. Okay. Another big difference between lowercase a anxiety and uppercase a anxiety is the level of disruption. So if you have a lowercase a anxiety, it's probably not going to be super disruptive to your regular, ordinary daily life. Another example would be, say, if you're a parent. I know many of you guys are parents, and your child goes to a friend's house to spend the night for the very first time, and you have a couple worries, you have a couple stresses because it's the first time. That would be normal, that would be to be expected, and that's probably not going to be very disruptive. But for example, if you are having a huge fear that your child is going to be harmed every time they leave the home, and you keep your child from leaving the home, that's now going to become obviously very disruptive. That's going to impede your growth, your child's growth. It's going to impact the entire livelihood of the whole family. Right? So if you've got something that's showing up repetitively, it's been around for over 2 to 3 months, the severity is high, it's over a 5 out of 10, it seems maybe somewhat irrational to you, and those are all signs that you've got uppercase A anxiety. And don't worry, okay, we don't need to make that larger than it is. It's still solvable. All that simply means is that you don't want to bank on it getting better on its own. It is very likely that it is not going to get better on its own. It could even get worse unless we deal with it, but there are plenty of ways to deal with it. Okay, so go ahead and let me know in the comments which of these you feel like you have. Is it lowercase or uppercase? Just put either lowercase or uppercase, and that will help me get a sense of who we're talking to and what kind of problems you guys are dealing with. I see many of you guys are joining and putting things in the comments, so welcome Kristen, welcome Jay, welcome Allie, welcome Peyton, welcome Nell. So glad you guys are here, okay? And let me know. So we've got, Allie says uppercase, okay, good to know. So now let's shift gears. Okay, so now that you know whether your anxiety is something that's probably going to go away on its own or it's something that's here to stay unless we deal with it, we then need to go to the next level. The next level is we got to figure out what particular type of anxiety. And usually this is the part where you guys will have some inclination of what kind of anxiety you're dealing with. But many of you guys are kind of brand new to your journey, so I just want to help you, okay? So I've basically separated this into the 5 major types of anxiety that we see with our clients, and I've put them in sort of the rank of the most common to the least common. Okay, so the first type would be health anxiety. Some signs that you have health anxiety are the following. If you find that you're consistently scanning your body, looking for proof that there's some type of an issue, if you interpret every sensation that you experience in your body as a symptom, a medical symptom that there's something wrong, if you feel the urge for constant reassurance from medically validated sources like a doctor or through some type of medical website, if you find yourself feeling a huge urge to find a lot of data and information about what you're dealing with, if you have a tough time believing what your doctors tell you, if you have a specific fear related to a disease or death, okay, those would all be signs that you've got health anxiety, okay? And there's a specific type of strategies and processes that we need to use to handle health anxiety. Okay, the second most common type that I see, I'm just going to label as panic, okay? So whether you are dealing with anxiety attacks, panic attacks, people sometimes get all hung up on the semantics of what's the difference between the two. I don't find that to be very valuable. If you find yourself with the anxiety getting to like an 8, 9, 10, it's very disruptive, you're hyperventilating, you're having trouble functioning, you feel like you have to stop doing what you're doing, you have to like sit down or lay down. If you feel like you really have to bring your focus and attention to your breathing consistently, okay, those would all be signs that you're dealing with some type of panic, okay? Another good sign that you're dealing with panic is if you find yourself getting anxious about getting anxious, okay? That's usually a sign that you've got panic going on. Okay, and by the way, as I explain these, go ahead and let me know in the comments which of these that you actually feel like you're dealing with, and that way we can serve you a little bit better. The third out of 5 types of anxiety that we see, I like to call fear-specific anxiety, or excuse me, specific fear anxiety. So this would be if you have any type of very specific fear that keeps showing up in the mind repetitively, especially if it's a singular fear. For example, I had a woman last year I worked with who had a fear that a comet was going to hit the Earth repetitively. It could be a fear of getting into a car accident, a fear of someone I just spoke to this morning was a fear of being mugged, for example. Okay, so there's all sorts of situations like that. So if you find that your mind is really fixated on one particular fear, or it could even be 2 or 3, okay, that would be what we would call a specific fear anxiety. Okay, I see Jay says getting panicked about panicked, and Tiara says fear of dying. So yep, those would definitely be examples there. Okay, the fourth type would be what we call social anxiety. Okay, now social anxiety, there's a couple different variations. I'm not going to go super into this. That could be its own video. All right, but the thing with social anxiety is that typically it is that you're worried about not measuring up to some type of an expectation in a social environment. That's the first type. The second type is you have problems with being out in public spaces because you're afraid of something like passing out or dying or having an anxiety attack in front of people. But primarily when we talk about social anxiety, it's usually that people are going to be anxious and worried about measuring up to some type of set of expectations they think they have to measure up to in that environment. So people might get hung up on, do people think I sound stupid? Do I sound smart enough? Are they looking at my eyelashes and my eyebrows, or what do they think of my outfit? Okay, all sorts of things of that nature. So if you find yourself consistently worrying about what other people think, what their opinion is of you, that is a very tall tale sign that you've got social anxiety. Okay, and then the fifth type, this is one that is a unique term that I've never seen anybody else teach, because this is based off of a framework that we teach our clients. Okay, but what you might also have going on is what I call model of the world anxiety. Okay, model of the world, what does that mean? Everybody has a model of the world. A model of the world is basically your set of beliefs about how life should be and about how you should be. Okay, and so people will have, as an example, like one type of model of the world is people might believe that they have to be an achiever. So let's say I've got somebody, and what they believe they have to do is they have to achieve, they have to succeed, they have to be the best, they have to continuously get promotions and raises at their company, they have to do all these types of things. Well, that person has built up in their head a particular image, a particular mental model of who they think they have to be. And if you feel like you are not measuring up to your mental model of who you have to be, you will feel anxiety. Okay? And in fact, the larger of a gap there is between who you are in your life right now and who you think you have to be, the more anxiety you will feel. And so for many of you, you may have a tough time kind of placing your finger on where is this anxiety coming from. I've felt like this ever since I was a kid. I felt like this ever since I was 10 or 12. And very often what happens is that there were a certain set of expectations that you either put on yourself or somebody else put on you. And then you started to develop a mental model of who you thought you had to be. And so there are 7 different mental models that can create anxiety. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of them I just mentioned is the achiever. One of them is the perfectionist, right? Believing that you can never make a mistake, that it all has to be exactly right, that people are going to find flaws in you. This usually comes if you had one or more parents that was really, really tough to please. So that's a very common situation, okay? And so if you have a mental model that you have to be perfect, that mental model is not going to match up with your life. And so because of that gap, because of that discrepancy, that's going to create anxiety. So the larger the gap is between how your life is and how you expect it to be, the more anxiety you will feel. Okay, and so that's where a lot of anxiety comes from. Okay, so let us know in the comments, which of these do you feel like you identify with more? Health anxiety, number 1, panic, number 2, specific fear anxiety, number 3, social anxiety, number 4, model of the world anxiety, number 5. Let me know. Some of you guys are adding in the comments already, which is great. I see Allie says, fear that my husband is passing. The woman 003 says being hurt emotionally. Jay says panicked about panicked. Tiara says fear of dying. Okay. And then Mariah on Facebook says fear of dying as well. Okay. So, and I see some of you guys are adding in the comments that you have multiple, and that's totally normal, totally okay. Don't be worried about that. All right, so what do we do? Right? If you've got this type of anxiety, what do you do? Well, there are 4 different ways that you can generally approach handling your anxiety. Again, think of these as kind of like 4 buckets, 4 different, actually the metaphor I like to use is think of them as like 4 different hats you could wear, like 4 different philosophies of how to look at your anxiety. Each one of these philosophies has some advantages and some disadvantages. So it's important for you to figure out which one really makes sense for you. Okay, and I'll talk through, again, I'm not a perfect guy, I don't have all the answers, okay, but I've done this for a long time. We've helped, as of the date of this recording, we've helped 513 clients reduce their anxiety by at least 75%, usually in about 90 days. And then not only the clients that we see, but I also consult with about 1,000 people a year. And so, I've gotten a really, really good sample size of figuring out what are the different ways people can approach it and what are the different, what is likely to happen depending on which way you approach it. So what I want to do in this final section for today, before I take any questions, if you guys have questions, is I want to help you kind of navigate how to address your anxiety. If you're feeling stuck, if you don't know what to do next, I want to help you get a good survey of all the different options available to you in the industry. And so that way you can figure out which philosophy is best for you. Okay. And real quick disclaimer before we get into this, I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. I'm not providing you medical advice. This is just me providing the best guidance and advice I can give you based off of my experience doing mental health coaching. Okay. So the very first philosophy that you can use to deal with this is you can look at your anxiety as a permanent disorder that needs to be simply corrected through biochemistry. Okay, so you could look at it through a biochemical imbalance lens and think that the best way to deal with this is let's try to correct the biochemistry. And of course, this would mean psychiatry or going to a general physician, a GP, and getting some type of medication. Okay, some of you guys, most of you guys probably have had some type of exposure to medication. Some of you are brand new. Okay, so there are people this is really good for, there are people this is not so good for, and I just want to help you kind of get a sense based off of the thousands of cases I've seen, some general guidelines that may help you. Okay, again, I am not in any way recommending you stop or start any medication, so you should follow the advice of your physician, but here are some things that you can keep in mind. First of all, medication is a very good option for people who it's currently working for, right? Imagine that. Right, there are some people who have an anxiety issue, and so long as they just keep taking their pills, they're good and they're fine and they're balanced, and that's good. So if you found one that works for you, that's a sign you should keep taking it. You should keep using that. And, as long as you don't have a problem, like a philosophical problem with being reliant on the medication, by all means, just continue to take it. Some of them do have side effects. Some of the side effects don't show up until later on in life. So that's just something to be mindful of. But if it's working for you, great. Okay, many of you, though, however, have probably either been on medication in the past or in the present, and it's maybe not quite cutting it for you. And this is kind of the experience that I see a lot of people have. For most people, medication will usually only decrease anxiety between 10 and 20%. If it goes farther than that, that's usually a good sign that you are probably responding well to the medication, and you may just want to stick with that. If you're finding that you're hitting that 10 to 20% plateau, I want you to rest assured it's not that you're doing anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just very common for people to hit that plateau. Okay, I see Jay says in the comments that that's him. So, yeah, that's good feedback. Okay, now here's a couple things that you want to keep in mind. Okay, if you have only tried one, maybe two medications, one thing you might want to consider is just going back to your psychiatrist or your physician and seeing like, hey, do we have any other options? Right, and there are tests that you can do to figure out what kind of medication you might respond well to. Now, here's what you really want to figure out. What you want to do is go to your psychiatrist or your physician, and you basically want to ask them, is this as good of effect as I can expect with medication? Or are there other options that we haven't explored yet? That is the key question I would encourage you to use. If they tell you, oh yeah, we've got plenty of other things we can try, and if you're on board with trying those out, then go for it. If they tell you, however, no, this is about as good as it gets, I think this is, you just need to stay on your medication, then basically what that's telling you is that the medication is probably valuable, but it may not be sufficient depending on what your ultimate goals are. Okay, medication is also great for people who just want to cope and manage and get by. Okay, so if you are fine with a 10 to 20% reduction, then cool, you're good. If, however, you're like the majority of our community and what your real goal is to overcome the anxiety, to really get the anxiety out of your life, right? We're talking about uppercase A anxiety, remember. To get the uppercase A anxiety out of your life, medication is usually not sufficient. Okay, and that's where we need to explore some different options. Okay, now, the second way that you can deal with anxiety to reduce it is you can go through the traditional therapy model. Okay, again, this is really good for some people, not so good for other people, and I want to help you understand which type of person you are so you can see what to do. Okay, so first of all, the philosophy of most therapists and counselors is that, again, you've got a permanent disorder and that this anxiety is going to be with you for the rest of your life. That's, by the way, not an opinion I share. That's not what I believe. I think that if we automatically assume that you're going to have anxiety indefinitely, then that guarantees you're going to have anxiety indefinitely. And that's one of the big beliefs that I deviate with traditional therapy on. But if you are committed to that attitude, if you are like, yeah, I believe fully and totally I'm going to have anxiety for the rest of my life, which, by the way, I don't think is true. But if you believe that, then therapy is potentially a very good route for you to go. Okay? And your therapist is basically going to use some variation of what is called non-directive therapy in most cases. It's a little different depending on where you are in the world. For example, in the UK through the NHS, they typically do a 6-session CBT oriented therapy, but it is usually very passive, very non-directive. Here in the States, there's a little bit more specification, so you can sometimes find a CBT therapist or a DBT therapist, okay? But almost every therapist is going to be operating from a couple key assumptions. The first assumption is that the anxiety is, again, a permanent medical disorder. The second assumption is that you're going to need ongoing indefinite talk therapy to manage and cope with the anxiety. So with most therapy, there is not a program, there's not a graduation date, there's not like a let's cover this ground in 6 months and then this ground in 6 months. Very often it's like, the attitude is like, let's buckle up for the long haul, right? You're going to need to be here indefinitely. And so this is one of the challenges I have. This is why I chose not to be a traditional therapist, is it's very slow going for most people. Now, if you're comfortable with that, some people like to address their anxiety in a very slow, easy, let's dip our toe in the water kind of way. If that's you, then therapy is probably the great place for you. Here's another good sign that therapy is a good situation for you. If you're the type of person that by explaining and kind of talking about how you feel, if you feel relief just through the act of talking about how you feel, and you feel that each and every time you do that, that is a very good sign traditional talk therapy is right where you need to be. Here's another good sign if talk therapy is good for you. If you feel like you are really steadily making concrete progress towards your ultimate mental health goals through therapy, then therapy may be all that you need, okay? Here are some signs, though, that therapy may not be sufficient for you. If you feel like you're hitting a wall with therapy, okay, if you feel like you're hitting a plateau, if you're getting frustrated that you're not getting farther faster, that's usually a sign therapy is not going to be sufficient for you, even if you trade with a different therapist. Okay, another good sign is if you find yourself getting impatient, getting frustrated, craving direction. Okay, most therapists come from a school of thought that they should not give you concrete direction. In fact, it is woven into how they are trained. They are trained to avoid giving concrete direction in most cases. And so if you are somebody who finds that frustrating, therapy is not going to be very satisfactory to you. And a lot of people think, oh, I need to find a different therapist. It's usually not a matter of finding a different therapist. It's just that that's how therapists are taught. Okay. Another sign that therapy may not be sufficient for you is if you've been doing therapy for at least 6 months and you do not feel like you are making that incremental progress that we talked about. Okay, so some people just continue to stay in therapy because they feel guilty about canceling their therapy. Like they have a rapport with their therapist. They've known their therapist for a long time. Their therapist is a nice person. Maybe your therapist has even helped you and added value to you, right? I'm all for doing whatever adds value. But it's just important for you to kind of assess, okay, am I hitting a wall? Is there a different goal that I have for my mental health that what I'm doing currently is not getting me closer to? That's the real question you want to ask yourself, because if that's the case, then almost always it's not going to be sufficient. Doesn't mean it's not valuable, doesn't mean you should stop necessarily, it's just usually not going to be sufficient. So I'm curious if any of you guys can relate to this, if you feel like you've hit a wall with either medication or therapy. Okay, let me know in the comments, and that would be helpful. I saw Jay says that that's him, so I appreciate that feedback. Okay, now the third of 4 big ways to deal with this, okay, third option that you have is you can handle it yourself. Now there are some situations with anxiety where you can actually do this, and particularly if you've got lowercase a anxiety like we talked about before. So if the anxiety has been around for, say, 60 days or less, if the severity is low, if it's like a 5 out of 10 or less, then very often it's something that you can handle on your own. Okay, here are some signs that you can handle it on your own. If you simply have fallen out of a couple habits that were working really well for you, then that might be a sign that you just need to get back into those habits. Now, the trick, though, is if in the past, when you had those habits activated, you really had your mental health where you want it to be, then great. That's a sign that you just need to get back to what you were doing before, and you may not need a coach or a therapist or somebody to deal with the issue. Okay, another scenario would be if you're going through a very understandable life transition, right? Chances are you can handle it yourself. Maybe you want to get some additional help through a therapist or a coach or something like that, but there might be a chance that you can just handle it on your own, okay? Now, some signs that you are not going to be able to handle it alone, okay, is if, again, it's been a problem for over 90 days, if you have already tried the standard things of Googling and reading books and doing supplements and doing meditation and trying journaling and all of the standard stuff that people try, and if you feel like that is only helping you on the margins, but it's not getting to the real root of the issue, that's a sign that this is not the type of thing that you're going to be able to just handle on your own, okay? Doesn't mean you can't handle it. It just means that you probably don't have the information that you need right now to get the issue handled. So here's the little question that I encourage you to ask yourself. Okay, particularly for those of you who've had anxiety for a long period of time and maybe you've had ups and downs. Has there ever been a time when the anxiety was reduced to your satisfaction and you were following a certain set of protocol, a certain set of habits on your own? If the answer is yes, then you may want to try just modeling yourself from the past, because the best person we can model for success is our past. Okay, and then the next thing that you would want to ask yourself is, okay, if that's not true, right? If I've never gotten the anxiety reduced to my level of satisfaction by myself, then that's a very clear indicator that you don't have the knowledge that you need to right now, okay? And so that's where some of these other options might be a good fit for you. Okay. And then the fourth and final way that you can deal with the anxiety is you can learn to retrain the brain. Okay. This is the philosophy that I've always leaned into because to me, it's the only one that really works. Again, there's advantages and there's disadvantages. So let's talk through it. The advantage of going the fourth route, figuring out how to retrain the brain, is that you can be the one who's really in charge of your mental health in the long term, right? And I'm not saying you're going to be perfect, like you're never going to have stress or sadness here or there, but you can get rid of the uppercase A, anxiety. You can get rid of the cycles of repetitive, irrational thoughts that don't really make any sense for you, okay? So that's one big advantage is you get to be the one who's in charge of your mental health instead of feeling that sense of dependence on something outside of you. Okay, the other advantage is that you get to use your mental health as a way to grow, become a better person, learn a new set of skills. Okay, so that can be very good. The other advantage is if you do it correctly, okay, key emphasis on correctly, there's plenty of ways to do this incorrectly, but if you do it correctly, you can actually have a lasting solution. So in other words, once you train the brain to be thinking more positively by default, it's a lot easier to keep it that way with a simple little maintenance routine over time. Okay, but it is going to take a little bit of effort and a little bit of time. And that's one of the disadvantages, right? This is not the quick fix route, right? If you really want to retrain the brain and do it properly, what I've found is it takes about 60 to 90 days. In most cases, 90 days is what it takes to get about a 75% reduction in the anxiety. And again, that's following about a 9 to 10 step process in those 90 days. Okay, so it's not for somebody who wants a quick fix. It's not for somebody who is just looking for the fastest, easiest way to reduce anxiety. If that is you, probably medication is your best route. I'll also tell you that the retrain the brain route, at least the way we do it, it is not a good fit for people who want things sugar-coated, right? If you're the type of person who really just wants to like be coddled and like really take your time and let's just talk about it, let's take our time, then the traditional therapy model is definitely the superior model for you. But if you're the type of person who finds yourself getting frustrated with not getting clear direction, clear action, and you want to know, like, what can I do to reduce my anxiety? Just tell me what to do so I can do it and get the anxiety reduced, right? If you're what I call like a Band-Aid ripper, then the brain retraining process is a very good fit for you. If you're a toe dipper, then it is not the right fit for you because it requires you really stepping up to the plate and taking responsibility and learning what really makes your brain tick so that way you can be the one with the user's manual for your brain. And that's the really key thing. Okay, that's how we do it. Okay, so what I wanted to leave today with, I hope you found today helpful. Simple little gift for you guys. For anybody who would like a completely free coaching session, I have a couple slots on my calendar still available for next week. So you can go to mentalhealthcoaching.com or just let us know in the comments. You can type the word session in the comments. Okay, and we can certainly reach out to you to schedule a time. It's a free half-an-hour session, no pitch, no catch. It's just me helping you out for a half an hour. The only catch is you got to show up, right? You got to take it seriously. I'm not going to rebook any no-shows. We've got plenty of people who want help and need help, so just make sure you commit to a time that you can show up. So go ahead and join us at mentalhealthcoaching.com. if you would like to. I appreciate the feedback in the comments. Thanks, Jay. I'm glad that it was helpful to you. And just quickly scanning for questions. Looks like everybody gave me lots of good feedback in the chat, but I'm not seeing any questions to answer today. So if you have any questions, let us know. We're happy to help you, and hopefully we can support you on a one-on-one session next week. Go to mentalhealthcoaching.com to book that. Otherwise, I do these free live trainings every Thursday right around 2 o'clock Eastern time. So if you want to join these in the future, then I can help you out. Tyler, I see you have a question. What's your question, buddy? Go ahead and type it in the chat. I'll answer it for you. I'll wait a second here for Tyler. Actually, Tyler, why don't you just go ahead and put it in the chat. We'll address it individually so I can end the live stream, okay? Thanks, everybody, for showing up, and then we'll address your questions later on. Put them on in the chat, and we'll take care of them. Talk to you guys later. See ya. Bye.